information on working with a small kennel, and I did some handout flyer things, and there are a couple of them left up on the table, and there were a few in the back of the room with people who had extras. If you would like one, have one. I did it mostly because my friend Carol put the topic of this panel on the internet among the sled dog group, posted it, and said, gee, what do you guys think? And it was pretty amazing, some of the stuff we got back. And so I said, this is cool, let's compile a list, and it'll be a starting point for discussion. To begin with, first question, when I'm on the committee for the symposium, and I was one of the people who said, this would be a good panel, this would be a good thing to talk about. And the first thing I thought of is, what is a small kennel? Because everybody has a different definition. Ross Saunderson and Joe Runyon think that Kathy Frost has a small kennel. But I will tell you, I think Kathy Frost has a pretty gall-darn big kennel compared to me and compared to a lot of people who are just getting started. So,
how big is her kennel?
Kathy Frost has 30 dogs in her kennel. So, some of the numbers we think about, just having a different frame of mind, 2 dogs is a small kennel. I don't think anybody's going to argue on that, but I want you to understand there are people who think they have a kennel of 2 dogs, and they do. I mean, it is a kennel. They have 2 dogs, and they go ski touring, and that is. So be open-minded when you think. 6 dogs, that's a small kennel. 12 dogs is a small kennel. 20 dogs can also be a small kennel. I think a lot of the size of your kennel depends on what you're trying to do, what your goal is, and what the body, human to dog ratio is in your kennel is different. Roxy Wright Champagne with a family of 42 relatives and 147 dogs, it's actually a manageable small kennel. But if you're the only person playing, 6 dogs is starting to look pretty big. So anyway, to begin, introducing panel members, I have Carol's bio.
You do?
Carol has Carol's bio. Carol says I get to read hers. I'm going to do me first, though. My name is Lynn Orbison. My kennel today is as big as it has ever been. I have 9 adult sled dogs and 5 sled dog puppies. I have 2 house dogs. Harness broke. Almost every adult in my kennel is spayed or neutered. And the ones that aren't are either the puppies are not because they're too young, or the adults are not because the breeding rights are owned by someone else. If it were my choice, they would be. Actually, one of them I just got, and she hasn't been yet, but you can't do everything the first week you get a dog, and so. What I do for a living with my dog team, I do dog rescue. I have always done dog rescue. I used to only rescue sled dogs to pass them on. You know, someone would say, gosh, you know, this is a really nice dog, but I can't. And I would take it and find somebody who wanted it. They're like potato chips. Once you get one, no one can have just one sled dog. That's why you got to have 2 to have a kennel. If you have 1 sled dog, you're only doing rescue work, and it doesn't count. I borrow dogs for many. I mean, I've raced for 10 or 12 years now, and truly I didn't own a sled dog until 2 years ago. I borrow dogs, I race house dogs, I do other fun stuff. Come on up here and pull up a chair. And I train teams for others. Last year was the first year my kennel goal was to train a team of dogs for Loy McIver, who is a blind retired nurse who lives in Portland, Oregon. She comes up every spring and trains and races dogs. And Terry and Becky Cummings, who have been her trainers for 4 or 5 years, could no longer do it. And I said, well, that sounds kind of like fun. I'll try that. So I told Loy I would train her dog. And so that's why I had to get more, because you can't borrow dogs for somebody else. You can borrow dogs for yourself. At least I can't borrow dogs to train for someone else. And I train puppies for Kathy Frost and Lloyd Lowry and other people, because I like to play with puppies, but I have no desire to procreate and add more. I think there are billions already on this planet, and I just want to play with the ones that are already here, because they're fun, and because it's a good thing. It makes me happy, and they have a good time too. My race record, I run everything from Basset Hounds in the ski juring class to the 6-dog class. I have never competed in the 8-dog class, except when I run in Jeff's race, and then I have another body to blame it all on. So that's me, and to my right, G, is my friend and the author of Ski Jur with Your Dog, Carol Kaner. She started out in 1982 with one dog, which I believe
Willow.
Oh, it was Willow. I gave her her second one. It's my fault. Her first race was a 3-dog preliminary in 1984 with 2 borrowed dogs. Guess where she got them from? She's been racing in 3-dog and 4-dog since 1985. Her kennel has grown slowly to its current size of 11 dogs and 1 house dog, 11 sled dogs. In 94-95, it was her best season ever. She won 4 out of the 5 4-dog preliminaries here at ADMA. She was the 4-dog points champion, 5th in the 6-dog gold run, 2nd in the 4-dog limited North American, and she won the Jeff's race, mostly with borrowed dogs because her kennel is so small that all of her dogs were money dogs at that point in the season. And Jeff's race, you aren't supposed to run money dogs, so she had to borrow. She had 7 spayed females, 1 neutered male, and 3 intact males. Her winning 4-dog team had 2 neutered dogs in it. She placed 5th in the Gold Run 6-dog, and also, her 5th place Gold Run team had 5th place Gold Run 6-dog team. Wow, isn't this fun? Had 2 neutered dogs in it. So, John, we want to know how many dogs you have, your kennel goals, and your race record.
I have 30 dogs, 20 running dogs. The rest are either pups or retired dogs. Kennel goal, just
Talk louder.
for a kennel goal, I want a better dog. That's the whole thing. Racing only plays a part as a proving ground, but the idea is to develop a better sled dog, maintenance-free. And as far as race record, I've been racing something since 1986, and I guess I went beyond 8 dogs in 1989 and progressed to where I am right now with 20 to 30 dogs. And as far as race record, I compete in 4 or 5 long distance races every year. I've raced in the lower 48 in a limited class and long distance down there, and placed everywhere from last to first, so it just depends.
Thank you. And on my left is Jim Cookwitt.
Yeah, my name is Jim Cookwitt, and I own a part owner of a kennel that's shared between my daughter and my wife. We currently have about 15 dogs. Of them, we've got 4 geriatrics, 2 that are probably going to be geriatrics this year, and the rest are racing dogs. Out of them, we only have 1 female that no longer can produce pups. The goals in life were, I bought 1 dog from a friend of mine that had a trapline dog. Driving by Jeff Stoddard one day, I watched the juniors racing and saw a little kid, you know, back there behind a sled, zipping around there. And my daughter was about 2.5 at the time. And I said, this is good. This will be something that will be a lot of fun. So it started that way, and then pretty soon another friend of mine that was racing with the Alaska Dogmanship Association in 3-dog class, Gary Schultz, big guy. And this guy was winning these 3-dog classes. I said, if I got 2 more, I could do this. So pretty soon it turned to 2, and then pretty soon I was having to borrow dogs because this one wasn't quite right. And I said, well, I need another one. I got 1 more, and then we had a accidental breeding, but fortunately the breeding turned out to be pretty good, and it's kind of grown from there. And basically our goals in the kennel and stuff are to have fun, have a family activity that we can all get involved in, and give us something to do in the wintertime. I was raised here as a kid, and I kept complaining, well, there's nothing to do. Well, I think my daughter realized there is something to do, and you have to do it all the time. So, racing, we've been involved with the juniors. She's raced in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6-dog classes. I've been involved with the 3, 4, and 6-dog classes with the Alaska Dogmanship Association. And another one goal is to to beat women. I always seem to get beat out by them. You know, and to have fun.
Thank you. And Tim Mowry, thanks for coming. I tried to get a hold of you and never made it. We're introducing, we need to know the number of dogs in your kennel goals, and your race record.
Let's see. Kennel size, I've got about 25 dogs. That includes one chocolate lab, a couple pups, and about 18 or 19 trainable long distance dogs. Kennel goals. Kennel goals is, like Jim said, the main thing is to have fun. My wife likes to ski jure and talks about someday maybe doing a race here or there. We talk about possibly starting up a tour business at some point. I try to maintain a kennel big enough to maybe do any of those things, where we can both go on a trip in the spring, or we can put together semi-competitive, quest teams. But the main goal is to have fun. We don't have any kids, and the dogs take up that void, and more than take up that void. Although I've seen people with some newborns, and I don't know if that's the case anymore. But race record, I've done mainly, I work a full-time job as a writer for the News Miner, and therefore it makes it hard to race more than, say, the Yukon Quest. That's usually what I try to put my efforts into. I've done the Iditarod a couple times before I came up to Fairbanks, and I think I've done the Quest 5 times now. We took last year off because we have a small kennel and we didn't have enough dogs to field a team. We had 10 dogs that were under 2 years old. That's one of the things about having a small kennel. Every now and then you have to take time off to get geared back up. And we're signed up again for the Quest this year.
Thank you. On my handouts, the number one advantage of a small kennel, what I want to say briefly about this list is several people have read the list and gone down the list of disadvantages and said, well, actually, those are advantages, depending on your viewpoint and your point of reference and your frame of mind. And so that's why I did the list, because it's an interesting thing to pique your interest and get you thinking about it. And the other thing I wanted to say at this presentation is, I don't care how many you have. If you've got 110, or if you have 2, if you don't do it, and do it to the best of your ability, you're not going to get there. I don't care what your goals are. I mean, if your goals are to waste money and feed 110 dogs, yeah, you can do that no matter how badly you do it. But being small doesn't mean better, and it doesn't mean worse. The bottom line is, it's you, and ultimately, and it's not the dogs either. I mean, it's not their fault. If you've only got 6 of them, and you can't make heads or tails out of it, don't blame the dog, because there's somebody else in this world that can take any one of those 6 dogs and do better or worse with it. I mean, we're all individuals, the hairy ones as well as each and every one in this room. And it's oftentimes a matter of the right match and the right connection. And a small kennel, what does well, whether you're big or small, is good connections, making the partnership work. And I think the first advantage listed is simple mathematics. This is where we, as small kennel owners, have it over the big guys, in that we got more time. I mean, and we can spend more time, and that goes on and on exponentially on the list. But so I wanted to say that from the get-go. And let's see, I have a couple of questions that people gave me ahead of time. I would like to hear panel members' comments. If you have anything, just jump right in. I'm very pushy, so you're going to have to be obnoxious about it. Someone asked us to discuss the ratio of kennel size versus team size for a competitive showing, i.e., how many dogs does it take in your kennel to do well in the Quest?
Oh, well, nobody conferred with me about this list, but going through with it, I mean, I've thought about all the things and they're right on. I think you need, for the Quest to be competitive, training, it's nice, the limit is now 14 dogs, so it's nice to have, I think 18 to 20 dogs to train and choose from, because it's really hard to take 15 dogs or 14 dogs to start the season training 14 dogs and think you're going to have a competitive Quest team without borrowing or leasing or something to that effect. You're going to have an injury or two. You're going to have a dog that you take it on that 60 or 80 mile run and it doesn't like it. And you know it's not going to want to do the Quest when you see that. And you're going to have things pop up here and there that really make it hard, and you need a few extra dogs to draw from. So I would say 18 or 20 to train for the Quest. That's minimum. I'm sure John would agree with that. There's a lot of people out there that are training more dogs than that for their Quest. I talk to people all the time that are training 40 and 50 dogs for one team. In some ways I think that'd be great, but in a lot of ways I think you don't know a lot of those dogs, like you know those 18 or 20 that you're training.
Okay. John? I don't know as if anybody can say what John will agree with.
Actually, I don't agree with that. I think that you can be competitive in the Quest if you have 14 adult dogs in your yard, and by adults I mean dogs over 1 year of age, you could be competitive in the Quest. You don't have to start with 14 because the limit's 14. You can start with 10 and be competitive as long as you have good dogs, you can take care of them. The key is the driver, you know how to take care of them. If you start with 10, you can always end up with 10, and hardly anybody else did last year on the Quest. So if you can, the key is with a small kennel, the advantage is just that. You have care, and you can learn how to take care. You can have a dog in your kennel. I mean, we have a dog in our kennel right now that's hypoglycemic and epileptic both, and I traded to get that dog. I traded a good dog to get that dog because I think this dog can be a better dog. And you can take care of that dog and learn how to take care of that dog and still race him. You can learn how to take care of injuries with a small kennel. With a big kennel, you lay him off and you don't run him because he's hurt. With a small kennel, you fix him. And that's the key. That's the key advantage of a small kennel. That's not a disadvantage at all, because on the race, you're going to have an injury. If you can't fix it, you drop the dog. If you already know how to fix it because you've dealt with it at home, it's not a problem. And so, I mean, last year I had 15 running dogs in the yard, and I had no idea which one to leave home for the Quest. So I just picked one. I picked the oldest one, left him home. You know, no reason, just did. I ran dogs that were a year old. I'll run dogs that are a year old this year. You know, it's not a problem. So, I don't know. I think you can run with anything you want to run with. It also depends on your goals. If your goals are to win, as Tim says, nice to have a few more dogs because you have a few more to pick from. But if by competitive you mean 10, which is competitive, then you can do that with as few as 12. So, you know, you have to decide what your goals are before you start. I mean, like now, or maybe in July. I mean, and that holds true whether you're running 6-dog races or open class. Decide on your goals and decide what it's going to take to get there and work for that. Don't set something unrealistic, though. I mean, if you have 10 dogs and you think you're going to win the Quest, that's unrealistic. If you have 10 dogs and think you're going to come in 8th, that's realistic. That's maybe setting your sights a little high, but it can be done.
Thank you. So, time. Time is, I think, critical in I mean, time is the finite quantity that we all have and how much time we spend, but there's a difference in how the time is spent. My husband can spend hours. Well, he has a hard time spending hours in the dog yard. But in his time in the dog yard, a lot less gets done in the training. I mean, a lot of technical stuff gets done. The snaps get changed on the chains, and the collars get checked for wear and tear, and the poop gets picked up. But quality versus quantity, and how you spend your time. You have a full-time job. It's really hard to invest the amount of time, and shit happens. I'm going to get that little hat because that's my favorite. And if you have 100 dogs, it happens a lot more than if you have 10 dogs. And if you have only so much time, what does the time get spent on? It gets spent on basic bare minimums, what has to be done. Of course, if you have 100 dogs, you have a handler, a professional pooper scooper. So anyway, I wanted to ask, this is another question that came in, how do you know when you have too many dogs? Or what are the telltale signs of a kennel that has outgrown its optimal size? We all think bigger is better, but Carol.
I have an easy one for you. When you have to fasten the dishes on the house instead of going to find them, you got too many dogs.
Oh, that's a good one. I had another one, when you can't carry the food bucket anymore, or when you have to, when you have to make more trips with the food bucket, you're too much. How many dogs is too much for you? How do you know?
See, I've got 15 now. Probably about 15.
When the neighbors call the borough?
I think...
And it used to be 10 when you had 10, right?
It'll vary quite a bit. Sometimes, at one time, my daughter was going to homeschool, and there was plenty of time to be spent in the yard. We could have had more dogs. There was plenty of work out there, and fortunately, I work full-time, but I'm fortunately in a situation where I can save a lot of my leave in the summer and use it in the winter time, and so spend some extra time because I can't to run the dogs. I have to take off at lunch, and I'm afforded an opportunity to take longer lunches so I can go run the dogs and do those kind of things. I think where I'm limited not only from time but also on space physically where I live. So I'm pretty much maxed out where I'm at now, and I think given half an opportunity, I could probably expand it some more. But no, I think 15 dogs in my situation is just right.
How do you know when you have too many?
For me, it's partly physical. I have the same limitation as Lynn, one food bucket. If I go over one food bucket, I got too many dogs. But it's also a gut feeling. It's like 12 dogs for me is one too many in my head. When I go out there to feed or water or clean up, I feel a little pushed. I feel like I can't give each dog the time they deserve. I feel a little bit pressured by that many dogs. So 11 is my limit, not just for physical reasons, but for emotional, psychological reasons. That's my comfort level, is 11 dogs.
Okay. And by the way, pitch in, bring your cards up if you have questions or comments, and if any of you guys on the panel see something that piques your interest and you have a comment about it, go for it, because that's why we did the list. This list was actually generated by questions on the internet, on the Sled Dog group. We posted and said, Carol did, she posted it and said, we're having a panel discussion. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of having a small kennel? And this is what came back, and some of it is pretty cool.
I'd like to throw one back in on the point of when you've got too many dogs, is when family members and yourselves are no longer having fun at what you're doing. I think that's a critical one. Mm-hmm. Because I know that when I was a little kid, we always had my parents had 12 and Great Danes, and they had a lot of them, and I used to really hate it. And it took me a long time to finally decide when I was older to get my own dog because of that. And so it was a conscious effort that my wife never had dogs when she was a kid, and so it was kind of a new thing for her. And so it was something that we kind of worked at with the family, and when we don't have fun doing it, that's when we know we've got too much. There's a lot of other things that go on in life, and you can't wrap your entire existence around the kennel. You know, you got to be able to take breaks and be able to back off a little bit and be able to have the opportunity for people to come over and cover for you for a little bit, things like that. So when you're no longer having fun, that's the time when you probably got too many.
Along those lines, I've been racing for years. I have never won. Have I? I don't think I've ever. Now there's a sign right there. I can't remember if I won. But I do have a trophy for third place in the 3-dog Limited North American from 1987, and I ran my golden retriever, my Labrador retriever, and a sled dog borrowed from a friend named Abnormal. and that was good. But winning isn't really it. On the other hand, racing is important to me. Races, for me, are a social event, and credibility. There's one on the disadvantage of a small kennel, the lack of credibility. I think that's one of my favorites, because I hear that a lot, and you see it a lot. I mean, you come to the symposium and what? You go to the presentation where Charlie and Roxy and all the big guys are talking, and not that they don't have a wealth of information and a ton of stuff to say, and we can't all learn scads from them, but there's a lot more. I mean, they're winning, and they're obviously doing something right, because you don't win if you're not doing something right. I mean, luck, I suppose, but not really. So, where was I? See, I'm gone. Anyway, lack of credibility. So I race, and I think it's fun and it's important, and I don't necessarily want to win, and I'm not driven, but I think it's important for the dogs to race, because I think it builds confidence. I think it gives them a chance. It's new exposure. I like to think of my dogs as like little sponges, and you just see what they soak up. Take them out there and see what they soak up, and then, but they're more than sponges, because then they take it in, and it develops, and you get something else out of them, and you go, cool. You know, I would never have thought of it that way. They figure things out, and or you see their reaction to something, and you go, oh, so that's how they see it. And for me, that's the whole point. I mean, if I were in it to win, I'd have gotten out ages ago. I do it because it's fun, and I think you need to keep that in mind. We have questions. In having a small unsponsored kennel, what and how much expense or help is needed to run the quest? Ooh, we got 2 people that can't talk to that one. John? What's it
Takes
called?
a lot of time. Time's the key to running the quest. One thing that Tim said when he was talking about how many dogs you need to run the quest, in his situation where he has to work full time, he doesn't have the time with the dogs. He probably needs more dogs than he has to run the quest competitively, and more money, because he doesn't have the time to invest in it. My time is, well, it's basically free. I do other things. I'm self-employed at home. My time is spent with the dogs, so I can spend that extra time. And so when you're talking about cost on the quest, it would vary a lot from kennel to kennel. And as far as actual money involved in running the quest, costs directly associated with the quest, not associated with caring for the dogs year-round and this and that. Talking about things just to get ready for that race. $2,500. $2,500. That includes entry fees, equipment, required veterinary stuff. You know, I'm assuming you already have sled. I'm assuming you already have gear, and only have to buy some additional stuff. You know, like mittens and, you know, some little cold weather stuff. I'm assuming you have all your major equipment. I'm assuming you make your own lines. I'm assuming you buy your harnesses when they're on sale, or make them yourself. You know, those are the things that you can do if you're a small kennel owner. You have that time. You know, it's a family-operated thing, or individual, and you have that time. That's your advantage, actually. You can find those things. A lot of the veterinary work you do yourself, You don't need to have someone do it because you're aware of every dog before he starts. You're running every dog every day or 5 times a week. You know the dog. You know when something's happening before it happens. You can take care of it yourself almost all the time. It doesn't cost a lot of money to run the Quest. So, like I say, I think it varies from kennel to kennel. That variation could go as high as $10,000 if you want to buy everything. I mean, personally, I make everything I use, including my sled, make a lot of harnesses. I'm not the greatest sled builder in the world. I build a pretty poor sled. It'll get me through the Quest. I've started buying harnesses. I build a pretty poor harness, too. I do make my own lines. So, there's limits. I mean, how much money you want to spend, and that's the guideline right there. If you want to spend a lot of money, go ahead. If you want to do it yourself, you can do that too.
I agree with John that if you've got everything, it doesn't cost that much. I don't think Jay Gatto probably shells out much money to run the Quest. You don't see him out there in a lot of high-tech new gear and this and that. He's wearing the same gear he wears running dogs in Fort Yukon. One of the things with the Quest is you've got to have a good vehicle or a vehicle that can get you around. I mean, I've had to pay people money to rent their truck, and things like that, or to pay somebody to be a handler because they're taking up a 2-week chunk of their time that they're just babysitting you sort of out on the trail. But if you've got everything, I mean, you're already feeding your dogs. You might want to buy a bucket of corn oil every month or something and feed them that, addition, and maybe feed them a little bit more meat and go buy some whitefish for the food drop or something like that. But if you've got everything and you don't feel like you need to go out and spend a lot of money on new things, I mean, if you go out and buy 1,000 booties, it's going to cost you, $500? My mom makes my booties. So you make do with what you've got in a lot of ways. If you've got to buy a new sled, you're talking over $1,000. So it depends on what you have when you're going into the race. It depends on what you want to have during the race. It depends on what kind of food you want to eat. All that kind of thing. So I would say I'm more inclined to say a little more than $2,500 with your entry fee in that, but I think under $5,000 you can put together a Quest operation.
One of the things to remember on the Quest is you're getting a lot of your food drops back, so you can send whatever you want. I mean, if you want to send an extra $1,000 worth of dog food out there, go ahead, because you're going to get it back everywhere except Eagle, basically. Even if you're not driving there yourself, you can share gas costs with someone that is going to one of those checkpoints that'll pick it up for you. So, and we're only talking Circle and Central at that point anyway. So those costs can be cut. And I mean, you can send extra booties and all that stuff, but you're going to get it back. And of course, as the years progress, if you're running the Quest more than once, you always got this leftover stuff. So, that little added benefit of having a bunch of leftover batteries and stuff that you can use all summer and all winter long, next year around the house. So a bunch of used booties that are still good enough to train in. So there's some things that aren't completely throwaway when you're running a race like the Quest because you get everything back. A lot of used plastic comes back. You can use that training. So some of these expenses are expenses, but then they become a benefit later.
We have more questions. I run a 6-dog team. What's the best way to do individual training with my leaders? And a second question, is ski juring helping with training okay? Yes. There's my comment. Yeah.
Ski juring is an excellent way. My daughter started ski juring a few years ago, and it's really helped out with leader training quite a bit. They get some individualized attention. Basically just 2 of them up front, and then and then this way you can find out which ones and stuff will do it by themselves instead of having all the pressure, all the other dogs behind them. It's kind of more one-on-one experience, and so I think that, besides good genetics and having a dog that's willing and has it in the head, but that's a good way to help them with the G and the Ha and the commands and stuff. stuff. And you can really tell with a ski juror belt. I've tried it only a couple times myself. Not that good on skis, but who's really working at it too. Just, you know, you got it right here and stuff. You can see who's pulling, who's just slack a little bit. So.
Feel it from the gut, literally.
Yes, gut feeling.
Actually, I use my ski juring belt at races in the bigger classes. I don't know about you guys. I have a bad back. I put my ski juring belt on, and they got the little hooks on the side too, and I drop chain, you know, with necklines, dogs to my side, and you can walk with several dogs and free up your hands to do whatever needs to be done and get work done. So ski juring and walking, I go in the summertime, put them on ski juring belts and take them for walks, and it sure saves on this. Looks silly in the parade though. Yes.
Something about ski juring that's really neat. When you're jihad training a leader and you've got a sled and you've got 4 or 6 dogs, and you tell the dog G and he doesn't go G, what do you got to do? You stop. You got to go up and physically take that dog and show him that you want him to go G or ha. And if you've got a small kennel and you don't have a really good jihad leader to train that dog for you, it's kind of hard because a lot of them learn that, oh, G means stop. Cool. When you have a ski juring rig and a setup and you go G and the dog doesn't go G, you go G. You turn your skis, you go, the dog feels the tug and goes, oh, I'm supposed to go right. It's a really good way to teach jihad training where the dog gets instant reinforcement of what you want. And a lot of times with a dog that isn't, you know, super smart up front, that's what the problem is the dog doesn't really understand. When you say, gee, we stop, and then you come up and you pull me somewhere, and I'm not sure what it is you want. So ski juring's great for that.
Excuse me, can I ask a quick skijoring question?
Sure.
I don't have a card. I mush and skijor with my dog, and with the Samoyed National Club of America, and we give points for the work they do. They give twice as many points for skijoring 5 miles as they do mushing 5 miles, and their theory is it's harder on one dog. My dog mushes skijors by myself, and then I put her in a 6-dog team. Do you think it's harder for a dog to skijor 5 miles than mush 5 miles? I just wonder what your opinions are. I think mushing's harder on it.
It completely depends on the ability of the skier. If you've watched some of our ski juring races, there's some dogs that, I mean, they come in with their tug line slack, let's face it. So it's a lot is the ability of the ski juror.
But if I'm skiing with the dog, she's not just pulling me.
I would say it's easier.
You think skijoring's easier than mushing?
Well, with smaller teams. With a 6-dog team, now you're starting to get into a lot more synergy. A lot of the dynamics is different. And so it can be easier, I think, for a dog to run in a 6-dog than to ski jur with.
Not pulling as hard?
Yeah.
Point of reference on judging a ski juring team, I was placing second to last, third from last, with my lab and my golden. Kent Carnes, who's a World Cup skier, decided to try ski juring and showed up at the hall one day, and I said, well, here, take mine, enter the 2-dog class. And he won with the same 2 dogs. And so, you know, and the dogs, I mean, they were one of those where like, are we in a hurry? So it's ski juring, and that, but see, that's a good thing, because your dogs, if you give them that time and that attention, and you can get blood out of a turnip if you're willing to work at it. And for me, I don't know what your guys' goals are, but for me, the fun is in the work. The fun is not in the winning. It's watching the light bulb shine on a 2-year-old and lead when you lead and you say, gee, and they dive to that side of the trail. I just go, ooh, go, yeah, and that's it. I mean, that's a good run for the whole day. It may be, you know, the 5 before that and the 2 after that, geez, are not quite, but that one, they had it and they knew it, and they can tell. I train a team for Loy, a blind woman, and I was a little skeptical because I thought, what do you do to train a team for a blind woman, and what's going to happen when I put her on the sled and it's all going to go to hell? And am I going to kill this woman? And she's ballsy, and I didn't, and she's amazing. But what I figured out was there is a kinetic, psychic line that tug line, I mean, there's 6 dogs out there, and yet I'm sitting in the basket and not saying a word, and just to make me feel better, she's driving the team, and she's doing a monologue and telling me what she's seeing. And she knows exactly where she is on the trail, but the coolest thing is she knows. I mean, she doesn't know that Mink's ears are bad, but she says, leader, you know, Mink's on the left in lead and she's having problems. Or she knows Comet dipping snow in wheel. She can tell. And so when I'm running dogs, and that dog up front does G, and my insides go, yes! They know it. It's two-way. It's not just me reading them. They're reading you. And you can get amazing stuff if you're just the least bit happy about anything. We have thousands of questions here, John. They're coming with names on them. I've got a small kennel, 7 adult dogs and 2 puppies with no really strong leaders. Oh, welcome. I think 4 of my dogs have potential. How do I fully develop it? I don't ski, so that is not really an option. You've had dogs with no leaders.
I have. Well, see, I took the cheater's way out. I got an old retired leader, and he trained all my other leaders, and they've trained each other. And it's definitely the easiest way, I think, is to get an experienced leader. You can often find an older retired lead dog that really needs a good home for the rest of his life, and I'll tell you, it's the best deal going. Because you get a dynamite dog who knows his stuff, and that dog gets a home, a good home where he can keep working, and a lot of sled dogs really don't care to retire. So if that's an option, that's a really good one. If it's not an option, I would say an awful lot of individual attention, taking their leaders on walks, teaching them G and Ha by walking. You can do that as well as skiing. Maybe hooking just 2 of them up to a sled, seeing, just so that you can still work with just the 2 of them. Just don't go a real long ways, and don't put any extra weight in the sled, but you can take 2 dogs with the sled if you're careful. And another thing is to really try to rotate out dogs. A dog that doesn't do good in lead one day, try him again. Try him in different situations. Give each dog a lot of chances, because a lot of times either a dog will take a while to figure it out, or sometimes if they're younger, this is, I don't know how old the 7 adult dogs are, but sometimes when they're just yearlings or even 2-year-olds, they take a while. Some of them mature later, and a dog that's lousy in lead as a 2-year-old, well, all of a sudden you stick them up at 3 or, 7? Lynn's up one of my wheel dogs at 7 or 8 and stuck her up in lead, and she said, oh, this is cool. I can't run that dog lead.
I do that.
So you can always try again and again and again. Give dogs a lot of chances, do a lot of rotating out, and really try to figure out where they're having problems and work with those problems.
Anyone else? Leader training without skis?
Learn how to ski.
Oh, on that note, I should mention I never skied until I put 2 dogs on the line. One dog is not enough. I don't do self-motivated skiing. The only time I ski is when I have someone to run me into a tree. So, you don't have to be a hot skier to ski jur. That's the whole point, is let them do a lot of the work. You just won't win.
It's pretty tough to make a dog run lead. You've got to find dogs that want to run up front, not necessarily little G and Ha. The first thing you need is a dog that just wants to go forward and doesn't want to turn around and is easily distracted. But they're usually a pretty hyper dog a lot of times that is really gung-ho. And you just go through your lot and you try every dog and lead. And when you got a small kennel, you can do that. And you're going to find dogs that, boy, this one didn't think it was that bad. And you got to consider too, well, if this is the first time you put this dog in lead and it went up there and it stayed in front of the team for the whole ways, maybe that dog's got some potential. Maybe it didn't yank that team every which way and have a line as tight that somebody could walk over it. But if it stayed out in front of the team, you've got something to work with maybe. Maybe the next time you take it out there, it'll lose some of that interest, But then you just coddle them. You put them back in the team. You put them in swing. Let them get used to running in the front of the team. Swing dogs a lot of times make good leaders after a few years because they get used to running up front. I've got swing dogs that know commands. you get a leader up there, and the swing dog is, and it doesn't want to take a G, but the swing dog's pulling it over to go G. So things like that.
I just thought of something. When you mentioned leaders, different people have different expectations of what is a leader. In my experience, I have two kinds of leaders. I have leaders that are driven, and basically their job is to keep the line tight. Go forward, away from me, and keep the line tight. And then there's the jihad, directional, cooperative, thinking member that is the brain that is up there. The advantage of a small kennel is you have time to run 2 or 3 teams. Just because you have 8 dogs doesn't mean you should put them all on the tow line every day. You will train your dogs better by running 2 4-dog teams. You get twice as many opportunities for somebody to think besides you. I mean, if you run one team, but I do put all 8 of them on the tow line once in a while, because some of the most amazing discoveries for me is when I've got what I think are my leaders up front, and I get to a situation and I say, Ruby G, and she's punishment for a real sled dog was to stop. Well, my basset hound, I'm sorry, it's required every half mile that we stop. That's the whole reward system is, okay, if you go for a half mile, we can go to the post office and everybody will admire you and pet you and buy you a cookie. And so you have to realize what the dog is thinking, and stopping is a bad thing for sled dogs. They love to run. They don't want to stop. So small teams where you have control and you can make them stop and they go, that isn't very fun, they figure it out. Any other questions? Here we go. Suggestion. Oh, John has 2 waiting.
I have a question here that asks how old's the oldest dog in my team, and do anything special for training older dogs. I'm racing 10-year-olds, and no, I don't do anything special at all. They train exactly the same as the 1-year-old does. The only, if there is any difference at all, it's later in December, January, maybe they get a run off now and then. But other than that, they run exactly the same. No difference. The mileage starts the same attention, everything. And, individual dogs might vary, but as a rule, that's it. Then I have dogs that have raced every year since they've been a puppy. And some of them run 6,000 or 7,000 mile races. They run every race I run because I don't have that many dogs, so they might run 5 races a year, or so, and they stay competitive. There's not a problem.
We have suggestions, please, for reducing stress in leaders in a small team when training and adding puppies to the team. This is kind of fun because I have 5 puppies this year. And so the first day I gathered all my puppies up. I couldn't resist. I took my 10-year-old North American lead dog, retired from Kathy Frost Kennel, and put her in front, because I had heard at the symposium that when you're training puppies, you run puppy teams, and that's how the big guys do it. And I said, watch this, I'm going to be big. And I put 5 puppies in harness with my 10-year-old lead dog, and we took off. And I mean, we came back, and this is good because my 10-year-old leader told me, in no uncertain terms, we got back and she climbed on her doghouse and passed out. She was like, and I was in the same shape. That's why I cut my hair, because it was sticking straight up. I couldn't believe it. And I'll never do that again, and I don't care if they say that's how you're supposed to do it. Do what works for you. And for me, 5 puppies in one sanity source is not good. Not what I should be doing. It's too hard. It's what you were saying, is when you're not having fun. That was not fun. And keep it happy. The stress happens when there's pressure, and the stress happens when somebody's not happy. That's another reason. Don't run dogs if you're in a bad mood. I mean, or if you do run dogs in a bad mood, don't blame the dogs when it's not a good run, because they are reflections, and you are a reflection of them, and you're going to get what you make. And adding puppies can be really fun. I mean, if I add 2 puppies to 2 adults and run a 4-dog team with 2 adults and 2 puppies, a lot of times I will put a puppy in lead and run a geriatric leader with and a anybody next to in wheel. It works, and the puppies infuse great enthusiasm. They're silly. They'll try anything, and as long as you keep your attitude right, it doesn't have to be stressful.
Okay, I have a question. This is an appropriate one here. Any tips for keeping teenagers interested in dog mushing as they get older? Perhaps it's not considered cool by other teenagers. I've recently been exposed to this kind of idea, and I guess maybe I'm a little luckier than some. My daughter has maintained an interest. However, you could see for a while there come certain points where they're not having fun, and while it is a family event, you cannot. I don't expect her at this stage of her life to spend as much time and be as interested as she used to be, and so the time that she is, I like to make sure it's not just a job and a chore. And so, boy, that is a good one, because at times, they're in there and they're working in the dog yard, and all of a sudden they want to go somewhere, and like in the spring, they smell like wet dog, and they go, gotta go take a shower and stuff. That is a tough one. It really is. And all I can say...
I could add that take them on trips, or make sure your dogs are part of a fun recreational thing, because my daughter Tanya lived and breathed dog mushing since she was 2, but there was a time period when the chores, she had correspondence and the chores outnumbered things, and she was getting overwhelmed, and we just went on a trip. Went overnight camping or something that she wanted to do, though. Just try to make that dog chores not just chores. I mean, why are we having dogs? I mean, if you're not going to use them. Well,
that's part of it, and I guess a lot of it would be involved in the decision-making process. If they feel that, like say the dogs that we have, and the whole thing, the truck, the boxes, everything. She is at the point now where she is a big part of the decisions that are made of which dogs are run, who gets to run what color harnesses, everything. I basically just be quiet and train dogs anymore. So, and because of that, I think she feels a little more part of it. And but again, there has it's a tough one too, because suddenly all of a sudden boys have become more important, I think, and it'll probably be all for naught. So I don't know.
This is an interesting question. I have 2 experienced sled dogs, both from different kennels, to ski-ger with. How can I keep their good habits up? What do I do if they start developing any bad habits, i.e. not listening, starting off the trail? Any recommendations for a new dog owner in this? My philosophy has always been, if you own a dog, you train a dog. And whether you want to or not, and whether you meant to or not. If your dog has bad habits, you let them get that way. And on the other half of that, I also have ponies, and I grew my own baby horse, and it was really, really cool. And other people come and see my baby horse, and who's now 5. And some people say he has bad habits, but his habits are mine. And I love him just the way he is. I built him the way I want him. When you get a dog from another kennel, they have habits. Whether those habits are good or bad is dependent on your perspective and the perspective of the person you got them from. At the last presentation, Kathy Frost was talking about dogs, multiple people training the same dog, racing the same dog team. And it's important that you agree with the person you get the dog from, or are willing to spend the time. You got a dog with epileptic seizures. That's more than I want to do. That I don't mind psychological, but physical, medical stuff is, to me, scary. And I mean, Carol's dog Sugar had thyroid, and it was a deciding factor in saying, thank you, but I don't want to play anymore. That's more than I wanted to do. That's not the kind of play I like. The habits your dogs have, I mean, and they're good habits, I might consider those habits bad. I mean, you're supposed to want your dogs to line out, but I get insecure when the dog up in front doesn't acknowledge. I mean, you know, it's like, hello, are we here? Jarvis is a lousy lead dog for a blind lady, but he's great for me because he looks back at me every once in a while and checks in. And we have a visual rapport, which when you're training for a blind woman is a bad thing. So she doesn't run him, but that's all right. So what's a bad habit? Not listening. Consistency, that's basic training. If you're training, you teach them to listen. And if you're like me, you talk nonstop, they learn to tune you out. But apparently I have a different tone of voice, because when I say what I want them to do, generally they do it. And that's training, and I don't know how. Any other comments on bad habits and good habits and borrowing or getting dogs from somewhere else?
I could have done
Whatever habits the dog has, it doesn't matter. Like Lynn says, what's a good habit to her may be bad to you. And I mean, that's certainly the case, but consistency in training will change that habit to what you want. I mean, if you have a dog, you've gotten dogs from elsewhere and they have habits that you don't want them to have. It's no different than teaching a house dog how to sit and stay or how to beg for something. I mean, they can be taught just as easily, and you can teach them whatever you want to teach them, and that's your job. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do when you're running dogs, or having house dogs for that matter. You have to teach them to get along in your household, and you have to teach your sled dogs to get along in your kennel. I have my dogs, I like them jumping up and down and screaming. If they happen to jump on me and bang me in the face, well, that's the breaks. You know, I'm supposed to smile because I want that. You know, I want them crazy to go. Guy that's got 3 or 4 dogs and runs them around, runs them to the post office, probably doesn't want that. So that'd be a horrible habit. He'd have to get rid of it. But you can do it. Just spend some time.
One thing I'd like to add, though, I don't know if I was picking up on this question correctly or not, but it's hard when you're running someone else's dogs because you have to give them back. And so in theory, you don't want to develop habits in them that the owner doesn't want. But you do have to have the confidence to know that you have the right to ask that dog to behave. And that's what I was wondering if I was catching a little in this question. If a dog isn't listening to you and that's a well-trained dog, look to yourself. Are you sure that you know you have the right to ask? If you aren't, if you ask a dog and you're not positive that you have the right to have that dog do what you want, he's going to pick up on it and he's probably not going to do it. And so you have to have a lot of confidence in yourself, and there's a hand up there.
Oh, I was just going to say, it wasn't my question. I just wanted to make sure they're my dogs now, but I want to make sure that I was doing it right, keeping up the proper consistency so they did not develop bad habits. And it just sounds like spending the right amount of time. And
If they're doing what you want, you're doing great.
Yeah.
This question, at which age do most dogs start to be considered elderly and perhaps need to be retired or have significant reductions in racing and training? I'm trying to look ahead and project the status of my small kennel in future years. Now, this is something that small kennels have different from large kennels, because we do it different. I mean, we can't just pick new ones. I mean, we've got them, and this is good. I don't know. Okay, someone. Jim,
It's going to vary quite a bit. You heard John, we were talking about 10-year-old dogs that are running in distance races. I've had dogs, they're running a sprint team at 8 years old and stuff. I mean, does this dog ever stop, you know? But what happens over a period of time, every dog's going to be different. Some of them are going to get old when they're 8 years old. It might have been an injury that occurred earlier on in life, and then they started getting a little bit of arthritis, things like that. And so it's going to vary quite a bit. In fact, I've got for a while there we had a kennel that was a team that was pretty much even aged. And what I've tried to do was I had all the experience and work into that, and then when they got older, all of a sudden, you know, I had to start from scratch again. And what I like to do is mix the ages up as much as possible. You know, you got some young ones, you got some older ones, and some in-betweens. And it's a real tough one. The one that got one real geriatric, well, right about 15 years old, you know. But the others, they can still get around, and they can still go out and do ski jury and stuff. They're not really, they're retired from competitive racing, but they're still not, there's only one dog in the yard that just won't go out and run anymore because it's too hard on her. But
I think retired is another word like small. What is retired? I have a 10-year-old leader from Kathy and Lloyd, and she raced lead all last year in the 6-dog team that I trained for Loy, and Kathy says she's retired. Well, I'm sorry, but she's my main race leader, and that doesn't sound retired to me. So it kind of, you need to go back to the beginning and what are your goals? What do you want to do? And as long as the dog is working, I mean, the dog will tell you. They make it hauntingly clear when it is time. I mean, it doesn't work anymore. At least for me, that's been my experience. When a dog doesn't want to play anymore, you know, they'll run along, but don't be asking me to make decisions, because when you ask, they go, I don't want to. And that answered for me.
I had one dog that was still running at a month shy of 13 in a non-competitive 4-dog team, and very happy. And one of the things I'd like to see more of is maybe old lady race teams or old men veteran classes where the older guys get a chance to. Well, yeah, the mushers too, but Val don't master. With Val Mackler around, forget it. But it is a real issue, and it's real hard, and you have to watch the dog. Sometimes the dog still really wants to go and just can't keep up, and that's really hard on that dog's head. And so I'm a great advocate of having at least 2 or 3 or 4 older ones that you can kind of run together so they can still be happy and go.
It's not only hard on their head, it's physically difficult. Yeah. I mean, their brain says go, 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 and their body says, I had, my Labrador was 13 and she was balls to the wall all the time, and I finally had to just hide her in the house when I ran because she'd have killed herself. She had no sense of preservation. More questions. Throw questions.
I have a question. I have a question here about how my breeding program is managed. And that's probably a pretty important question for a small yard, because most small yards don't breed very many dogs, or if they do, you run into a problem. What's going to happen with as you start to phase out older dogs? And I'm not absolutely certain I can answer that question real, you know, I can answer it to my satisfaction, but that might be different than a lot of people in here, because you have maybe different ideas or different goals than I do. My breeding program is I mean, I raise 1 litter of pups a year basically, or on the very off occasion I might have 2 small litters because I have an accidental or something, but generally speaking, I retire my dogs from competitive racing early, so I always have room for the puppies coming in, and I get rid of my older dogs by finding homes for them by the time they still could probably race competitively another year or 2, but they become a good dog for a recreational team, and at that point they can probably run recreational or ski juring or something like that for 4 or 5 more years comfortably, and then they have another home before they're wore out, and I have room for the puppies. And that's how I manage my breeding program. But I realize that that's not possible for everybody. And again, I guess it it's a whole matter of what your goals are. You know, I'm trying to make a better dog. Whether that's very unrealistic or not, I don't know. But as somewhere along the line, someone is going to have to cull that dog, that old dog, or puppies. If you raise puppies, you're going to have a puppy that's absolutely unacceptable for some reason. And if you're a dog owner, that's your responsibility. That's nobody else's. And somewhere along the line, you got to address that issue, and I can't address that for you. You have to decide that yourself, what you're comfortable with. So somewhere, I mean, the person, if you have a team of 10 dogs, they're all going to get old someday. And even myself, if I pass them on when they're 8, someone's going to have those dogs when they're 13 or 14. So before you get dogs, figure out what to do with it yourself at the very beginning, what you're going to do. I mean, I kind of favor the Jack Kevorkian outlook. When the dog is old and he can no longer have a quality of life, he can no longer run anymore out of the yard, I still tend to keep him another year. But that's just me. I mean, whether it be your house dog or your sled dog, when he reaches the point where his quality of life is deteriorated to the point where you think that he is not doing well enough to be around, then you've got to do something about it. And the same applies if you're breeding pups and you've got a puppy that grows up as a biter or a fighter. I don't think we want those in the sled dog world, whether you're raising, or if you're raising German Shepherds, you know, which I do that too. If you've got a dog that grows up like that, it's your responsibility to do something about it. We don't want those dogs in the breeding program. We don't want those dogs running around loose. It doesn't do anybody or anything any good. And my answer to that is to cull that dog. And it's very limited. I mean, it shouldn't happen very often, but somewhere along the line it's got to happen. So your breeding program grows from the time the dog is conceived until the time he's 15 or 18, you know, depending on the dog. So I guess that's the best answer I can give, which isn't much, I guess.
Along those same lines, I think if you surveyed this group up here, you would find that the majority of us don't have a breeding program per se, and that the dogs we have came from somewhere else. And I'll be the first one to tell you I have never paid cash money for a sled dog. I have never even traded, well, I traded for pigs. I did not trade for a dog. I have what the real racing world considers leftovers. And I wouldn't trade any of them for anything. I mean, they're just fine. And Patricia Bear gave me a dog last season. She said, she's a good dog, she's a nice dog, I really like her, but I want to run 8 in open class, and she just doesn't seem to be enjoying herself, and I don't know what to do, and I want her to be happy. Would you like her? I said, okay, I'll take her and try her. She's my main leader. Patricia's like, oh, there it goes again, give a dog away, somebody else runs it and lead. Because she said it's a great dog, but she's not much up front. Well, and she hasn't got the direction stuff yet, but she's a hard driving dog. There are other people's leftovers are the gems of the world. Carol's comment about training leaders, the best thing you can do is find a geriatric, not too geriatric, but an older dog that already knows the ropes, that doesn't have the chutzpah to stay out in front in a competitive winning team. It's got theoretically all the training it needs and all the training you need. I mean, I've got dogs that know more about racing than I'll ever know. And use that to teach you and use that to teach your other dogs. It's a wonderful resource, and as long as the dogs are happy and you're happy, it's the perfect solution.
Could I just add that? I wrote that question to John. We look for a larger furrier type of dog. We like doing long camping trips, and we found that most of the dogs that are available to buy, I'd rather not do a breeding program. If we could buy dogs, that would be fine, but we look for something a little bit larger. We do a lot of snowshoeing in front of our teams, and the smaller dogs that we've tried don't work out as well. I guess I'd just like to know your thoughts on would it be acceptable, would it be better to just go with some dogs that might not be exactly what we're looking for, or should we try to breed more?
What do you mean by larger, furrier dogs? I mean, what are we talking? Are we talking 100-pound dogs?
No, about a 70-pound, 65 to 70 pounds.
They're out
Those
there.
dogs are all over the place.
Yeah.
I bet you the people in this room, there's more of those than there is any other type of dog. And I have dogs like that I race. They're out there, and they're, you know, you can either find them from. The trouble is with these people here that have these dogs, they ain't likely to give them up. I'm not likely to give mine up either. So the trouble with, you can't get dogs from small kennels. The big kennels don't have them. You know, the small dogs are really the small kennels are attached to their dogs. They're not going to give up too many. If you look around though, you might be able to maybe share a breeding with another small kennel and find what you want. You might, you know, all these people with a few dogs are going to have dogs that are getting old that they can't run anymore. They're looking for a couple of new dogs, but they don't want 5. You know, there's share breeding. Or one thing to consider, let's talk about culling again. Cull at birth. When they're 1 day old, decide what dogs you want to keep. You want to keep 4. I mean, if a female has 8 dogs, I mean, you're silly to keep 8 dogs with a litter, believe me. None of those dogs is going to raise to its potential. You know, 6 is max, but 4 is better. Share breeding with somebody. If you can't cull dogs, make sure you breed with somebody else's female that can, because it's a very necessary part of raising dogs. I mean, it should be kept to an absolute minimum. I mean, personally, if I cull 1 dog a year, that's something, you know, but nevertheless, you know, it needs to be addressed, and you know, maybe share breeding amongst 3 people. If you want 2 dogs, 2 new dogs, should be pretty easy to do, especially with the people here in this room.
Also, you can spend a lot of time, you know, if you take a little extra effort to, not just for the big dogs, but for any dog, if you can, if you're looking for a sprint dog, it'll go fast, and try and do is get the best genetics. And there's a lot of information out there with the pedigree books that are available for sale and stuff that have histories and bloodlines way back. You spend a little bit of time in there, a little bit of research and stuff, but a lot of times you can find a large kennel and stuff that've got really more dogs than they really know what potential they've got there. And I've been fortunate. I've gotten 2 excellent dogs from a very large kennel, and I think that had given more time or more personalized time, those dogs would have had a much better success with that kennel. And I was fortunate to get them, and that's what I use for most of the breeding in my yard now is kind of wound down to that those bloodlines that I received. And it's genetically they're just what we've been looking for, and they're very good. But you have to do your homework too. Be able to find some bloodlines in there that are just the right size, good history performance-wise in the past, and
One thing to add to that, when he's talking about that, I'd like to reinforce that. Do your homework. You can't just take 1 dog that looks like what you want and another dog that looks like what you want and breed them together and get puppies to turn out like that. That ain't going to happen. I mean, or it might happen, but your odds are poor. I mean, look at their backgrounds if you can. Look at the grandparents, especially. You know, go back 3 generations if you can. Find out what those dogs looked like, what they performed like, and not just the best of the litter. Find out what the poorer dogs in the litter did, what happened to them. You know, did somebody try them out and they didn't work and they got rid of them, or what the story was. Really do your homework when you're breeding dogs. I mean, there's no other way.
I think another good resource is when you're traveling outside. A lot of people like to take northern dogs to different states, and there's a lot of rescue organizations or a lot of dogs that have a lot of potential for being excellent working dogs in Alaska end up in the wrong place in the wrong, you know, a husky doesn't fit in so well in someone's backyard in Colorado, and you know, when you're traveling outside or your friends traveling outside, or even on the internet, there's different rescue organizations or a lot of outside resources, and with the making enough contacts, you can get a dog up here, not hardly any extra expense or effort, and then you have the satisfaction of a really great dog coming back to life.
How far can you safely run just 4 dogs?
How fast you want to go? How you know what?
10 miles an hour.
Okay, I mean, you could go all day. As long as the dogs are happy. I mean, I wouldn't do it the first day of the season. You know, you need to build up your endurance as much as theirs. I mean, I would be crazy if I went.
I guess what can you expect from 4 dogs versus 6 dogs or 8 dogs?
I've taken 4-dog teams 10 miles with a passenger in the basket.
And I've taken 6-dog teams for a half mile, and they've barely made that. A lot of it's going to depend on the conditioning, the training experiences. You know, are they doing some weight training, getting used to doing distances? It's going to be dependent whether it's beginning of the season, end of the season. A lot of variables there.
When you talk to some of these
Well,
guys,
just talking, say you're getting ready for camping because they do recreational. Should you say, okay, I can do this with 4 dogs, doing 6 dogs, doing 8 dogs?
I mean, you look in the Iditarod last
No,
year.
okay.
Here we go.
Ramey Brooks was down to 5 dogs, I think, with cripple or something, and made it half the Iditarod Trail with 5 dogs. Jimi Hendrick in the Quest one year climbed Eagle Summit and Rosebud with what, 5 or 6 dogs.
Yeah. I mean, you can go as far as you want to go. When I started running dogs, I had 3.
It depends how big your sled is, how much you've got in your sled, how much you're going to be off behind the sled, helping the dogs. You know, all sorts of things. You can, 4 dogs that are in shape, you can.
I've gone 200-mile trips.
4 dogs
with 3.
can fit in the tent without arguments.
200-mile trips with 3 dogs.
Really?
And one was a German Shepherd that pressed in the harness.
Well, that's kind of
Just, you're going to go slow.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one. I have a 6-dog, very novice team that vary in size and weight, 40 to 70 pounds. I've heard it is better to pair them according to size, but I've always paired them according to who is happy where. Should I try to change their minds and pair according to size and gait?
I want to answer this, but I also want to hear what it is.
Well, you go first.
Okay, well, the reason I want to answer it is because for many years, all I had was 6 dogs. And there wasn't any choice. I couldn't pair them according to size because none of them was even close. And I had everything from 35 dripping wet to 70. And my feeling is that for a recreational team in particular, I think happiness is real critical. But even for a sprint team, I can take 2 dynamite dogs, sprint dogs, but if I put them next to each other and they're miserable, I'm not going to get the best out of them. So my feeling is pair according to where they work the best. But I'd like to hear what anybody else says about that.
I have a 70-something pound big greyhound mix and several 35-pound munchkins that were given to me because they real dog mushers said they had to take 2 steps for everybody else's 1. And I run them side by side because I think it's fun. I think they look adorable. It looks absolutely silly. And you know, if my attitude is happy, their attitude is happy, and so we just have a good time. Now, my vet, Jean Olson, does chiropractic work on dogs, and she has opinions about where in the team they should run based on their size and bone structure. And my biggest dog, my 70-pound dog, everyone says, oh, he's a wheel dog. Don't ever run him anywhere else. And Jean took a look at him and said, actually, wheel is probably the worst place you can put him because his build is so high and tall, and that line coming directly off the sled and the stress on the back of his pelvis is not a good thing. Unfortunately, he's also the only dog in my yard that shouldn't run up front. I won't say he can't and I won't say he won't, but he shouldn't run in lead. And since I do a lot of 4-dog training, if he's not in lead, guess what? He's in wheel. But so I don't know. There are lots of opinions on where and what. I think you're right on. Go for what works. If the dogs are working well together, you're doing it.
Can we hear what? I'd love to hear what.
How about you guys? You have odd shapes?
Oh yeah. I mean, all the dogs in my lot are different shapes and sizes. But the thing that when I started out, I started running a dog team from Joe Reddington, and the thing that he always stressed, and the thing that I've maintained in having a small kennel, is that the dogs have got to feel like a team. There's got to be some camaraderie there, and that means putting dogs. I mean, in an NFL locker room, a good coach doesn't put 2 players who hate each other and fight each other in practice every day right next to each other. They're sort of out away. But you got to make do with what you have, and you got to make them feel like a team. And for me, a lot of that has been raising my own dogs. I've got to the point now where most of the dogs in our kennel we've raised from pups, and I don't have fights with those dogs. I can run those dogs next to each other at any point, anywhere. And there's a couple that Grizzly likes to be on the left side, and if you put him on the right, he makes life for the dog on the left miserable. And so does Lefty. That's why his name Lefty. But I mean, as long as they're, my basic premise is if their lines are tight, they're happy if they're not sitting there growling at each other. And if you got a dog that's a good working dog, and you've got a dog that, I've got one dog, Tank, that we go out of the lot and he likes to yap at the dog next to him and play with him. And some dogs, that really intimidates. They think he's gonna get all over them, but he just wants to play. So I put him with Grizzly, who will just put it right back in his face whenever he tries to get it to him. And they don't fight. Tank just gets a message, oh, he doesn't want to play. And then he straightens out. But I'm not going to put that dog next to Moose, because Moose thinks he's going to get his head ripped off when I put him next to Tank, even though Tank just wants to play with him.
Keep the big dogs out of the wheel, unless you're going to raise your tug line on your sled. Otherwise, like Gene Olson saying, it pulls down their hips. Just move them forward. The less angle you have on the tug line coming from the sled to the dog, the better off you are. The straighter, if it's perfectly parallel to the top of to the hookup on the harness, that's the least stress you could possibly give, and the most forward motion you can give. Beyond that, keep them happy. But if you've got a sled with a hookup way down low, and you're trying to put a 70-pound dog in the wheel, or a dog that happens to be like 27, 28 inches tall at the shoulder, you're going to hurt him. And, I mean, that's mechanics. I mean, forget where he's happiest. He might be happy in the wheel getting hurt, but you won't be later.
I've seen some people that hook their wheel dogs to the sled. They don't hook it back to the line. They hook it right to the sled, and most of it's been top racers and Iditarod Quest that I've seen doing that.
They're hooking way up on the side of the sled, and he's not getting jerked by the tug line and all that, and that's the reason for that, and it works. You know?
When on the sled?
Right on the side of the brush pole, right at the top of the curl. It probably wouldn't work for a dog, and they lengthen the line out a little bit too.
Yeah.
You know, they lengthen that rear tug out. Sure. And it gives more. The dog can provide more power to the sled. Kind of takes the place of an old style Jeep hole. It lets the dog do the work. Works real good for trips. You know, because with a heavy sled, lets your wheel dogs in. You can use a big dog back there, but you're bringing that line up there. Will Forsberg uses that all the time.
Oh, yes.
He's big dogs, you know, puts them back on the sled. But you take a look at his sled, it comes up pretty high and back, and the angle to the sled dog is very minimal. I mean, you're not going to get that line parallel no matter what. I mean, there's no way, because the sled isn't that high. But the closer to, or I should say perpendicular to the closer it is, the better to that. So, you know, if you want to, you know, mostly that's why your wheel tugs are longer than your you know, mid tugs, is to get that angle from being so sharp.
We have about 5 minutes left. Any more questions? Yes.
I got a question about building miles and starting out from a long summer where you haven't run them a whole lot. What distances should we start with, and how fast should we increase them?
You running short or long? I mean, you're running sprint or long distance or trip? Mid distance?
You haven't run them. Have you run them at all yet, or?
Yeah, I got 30, 40 miles on
So you run them how far, like right now?
it. About 7 miles, 7.5 miles.
You're not far behind me. I just did a story about this the other day, and Mark May was saying he does reps with his dogs, like a weightlifter. We'll go in and you'll do 4 reps at a certain weight, and then you'll do 4 more reps. And what they do is each week they do, say, 4 or 5 reps at a certain distance, whether, you know, 5 miles, say they're going 5 miles. Well, they'll do that 4 or 5 times before they jump them up to 7 miles. You know, you'll do that 4 or 5 times before you jump them up to, say, 10 or 12. Because once you get up to 7 or 8, then they have an easier time handle it, a longer distance. It's more, I think, when you start out from 3 to 5, it's really crucial to give them some time to develop, to get used to that and build up some endurance in there. But you don't want to take a dog, I think, and run it 3 miles one day, and then when you're first starting out, run 5 miles the second day and say, well, okay, I made it 5 miles, we'll go 10 this day. Give the dog a chance to build up the base, and just like running. I mean, you go out and start running, you don't start running 5 miles, or else you're crawling home. I am.
Well, I started out, I did just a couple miles first few times, get them back into it, and then jumped up to 4, did that a few times, went to 6, and then it's just shy of an 8. I did the last 2 times I run them, but I mean, and I had an extra body sitting in the sled too, which gave a lot more weight. Not a whole lot of snow. There was a little bit of sand and dirt showing through, so it was a little more drag also. But even then, with the weight and doing that distance, I mean, they were smoking, and they come back, and it didn't appear to be tired at all. They wanted to
How
go.
were they the next day?
Fine, ready to go.
Go for it.
What are you doing with them? I mean, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to race, or are you going to just run trips, or what?
Trips mostly.
How far are you going to go? 50?
I'd like to.
How fast do you want them to go?
Fast as possible.
I
knew you were
don't
going to say that.
Well, I was
If you want them to, if you want them
about
to,
the quest, so.
if you want them to go as fast as possible, you can try take a look at what the marathon runners do. They build up their miles, like these guys are saying, build up, 4 when you get a base. Then when you hit like 5 miles, jump them to 15 or 20. And watch them slow way down and be tired. Let them take their own pace. Don't hurry.
Yeah, I tried to do when I went to 8 and put the weight in the sled.
It wasn't a big enough
you're not
jump.
listening. Bring them from 4 to 20, not 4 to 8. That's not a jump. That's nothing. I mean, dog can run 4, he can run 8.
Yeah, it was pretty quick when they did it.
That's okay. He can run 20 with no training if it's a fit for a sled dog.
Yeah.
He may not look real good the next day,
Yeah.
but he can do it. So it's not a big deal. But then after you run the 20, come back to 4. It's called interval training. All marathon runners do it. All long distance runners do it. They bring it back to pick up speed. They take it to 20, you come back, that picks up speed. That makes it easy for the dog, real easy for him, because he just did a 20. You give him 2 days off after that 20, or maybe 3, and then you come back to 4. And then you run him 4 maybe a couple times, and you let him go to 8. And then you run 8 for a little while, then you might go to 25. Then come back to 8 again, and stay there.
Do you find that as far as running a sled versus a four-wheeler and working speed versus weight help out at all? Or?
I don't know. I wish I did. I have no idea.
A lot of people say that, in talking to a lot of experienced mushers, they're not as concerned about mileage as they are the number of hookups at this time of the year, and just having the dogs feel comfortable in harness and feel comfortable in the team and not chewing lines. That's the time, if you don't want them jumping and screaming, you train them not to jump and scream. Things like that. But a lot of it is on a cold day when it's, right now 10 below, you go home and run dogs. You haven't hooked them up all year. You can go, like John says, 10 or 15 miles and they're going to look great, And that's one of the things I was going to try to make a point in having a small kennel. A lot of people, especially distance racing, think you always got to be going further and further and further. You start out at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, Well, I've got pretty much every year in my kennel what I call a rehab team. And that's like 6 dogs, that for some reason maybe one had pups in August, and I've got one that has that, and she's just not ready to do the mileage that the main team's doing. I've got a couple of young dogs that are just a year old. I've got an older dog that I know is not going to race this year, so I throw her in. But it gives you a chance that you go run your 25-mile run with your main team, and then you come back and you go do an 8 or 6 or 8 miler with this other little team. And a lot of people are kicking themselves going, God, I need to get these dogs up, more miles on these dogs. I got to get more miles on these dogs. Whereas you're doing what John was just saying, you're doing interval training. Maybe the dogs, I know they do. They get sick of running 25 miles a day, 5 days in a row. And you take them back down to a 5-mile run, and you say, ha, where they think every other day you're going straight ahead, and you say, ha! And they're like, boy, their ear gets picked up. And they go home and they're just happy as can be, and they're going to be much more content to do that 25-miler the next day or something like that. So a lot of things, in having a small kennel, a lot of things that people see as disadvantages, I mean, you can go through on this list. It's like they said, they turn out to be advantages. And a lot of it is rationalizing in your own head. Don't try to do what everybody else is doing.
Yep.
Do what you can do and think about it in a positive light. God, I got these 6 dogs out today. You know, maybe on the way to 8 miles, but they all got some exercise. They built up a little bit more, you know, and it's better than having them sitting in the yard, you know, moaning about it.
Bottom line is, if you're racing with a small kennel and you do everything exactly like Rick Swenson does it, he's going to beat you every time because he's got more dogs to choose from. You got to do things your own way. You got to do things better because you don't have as much to choose from, or at least different, and hope it's better.
I would like to thank all of our panel members for playing, and I would like to thank all of you for coming. And remember, be happy.